Hello everyone and welcome. I'm really excited to present this first half-day webinar today. I'm Camilla Jansen, I'm a GP working in the New Forest in Hampshire, and more recently I've been involved in developing a rolling GP education programme in conjunction with the Wessex LMC and with Wessex GP Education Trust. So this is the first of a series of half-day webinars, and there are numerous up-and-coming hour-long webinars, and they're all covering relevant and a variety of topics that will be helpful in our day-to-day job. So please do look out for them, and they will all be advertised on the Wessex LMC education page or the Wessex GP Education Trust site. So this morning's webinar will be recorded. It will sit on the Wessex LMC education page, so you can view it again at a later date or signpost friends that you might think would benefit from it. And it's also made into a podcast. So if you're anything like me and like listening to education while you're out cycling, walking or driving, then it's a good option. So the variety and offering of talks are as advertised today. We'll try and stick to the timings and round up promptly at 1 o'clock. Typically it will be a presentation followed by a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, then please feel free to write them in the question and answer box at the bottom as we go along. Try not to write in the chat box, but please keep it to the question and answer box, and we will address these after the presentations. So our first speaker is Graham Phillips. Welcome, Graham. I'll ask Graham to put his microphone and video on. Graham Phillips is...
Yeah, hopefully you can see me and hear me now.
I think we can, thank you. So Graham Phillips is known as the pharmacist that gave up drugs. He is renowned for helping people address the root cause of problems by addressing and understanding lifestyle and diet issues with the ultimate aim of coming off medication rather than continually relying on taking more and more drugs to manage underlying problems. He's got a fascinating talk for us today about the obesity pandemic. He's passionate about optimizing metabolic health, and he has a wealth of knowledge on the subject that spans all sorts of things: hormones, insulin resistance, gut microbiome, sleep, cholesterol, statins, different diets, intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, to name but a few. And he can talk at length about the science and evidence behind these. So I thought he was well placed to come and speak to us today. He's also got ProLongevity, which is a program that supports people wanting to lose weight through education and individualized diet advice and support. And he incorporates the use of a 24-hour glucose monitor in this program for people to understand the individual response they have to food. And his success has been demonstrated by patients maintaining significant weight loss with the knock-on effects of improved health, improved vitality, reduction of medication, and reversal of metabolic problems and type 2 diabetes. So great achievement. He's married to a GP, so he's well placed to know what challenges we face in our day-to-day life. So thank you, Graham, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Camilla. So I'm hoping you can see that.
That's perfect. We can all see that.
Okay. So yes, thank you for that introduction. I guess I've been quite a senior level in pharmacy profession. I helped establish the Pharmaceutical Society, and I've done a lot of work with the Royal College of GPs and with the BMA because of the national level work that I was doing. And I built, I had a group of 10 pharmacies, and I very much built it around a high performing GP practice, having worked with lots of GPs and been really inspired. So we were research active, we were training practices, we created a collaboration. So although we didn't all practice in the same geographic space because we were 10 pharmacies, we created a kind of a federated model, like a high performing GP practice. And we won numerous rewards, but at the end of it, I got frustrated because I thought, I'm not really curing anyone, and we all have our own personal journey. I was a fat kid, and the fatter I got, the hungrier I was, and the hungrier I was, the fatter I got, followed all the guidelines. And actually what started me on my journey towards no longer being fat or hungry was that original Horizon program, Michael Mosley, and the 5-2 diet. And I quickly lost 10 kilos, and I thought I want to really understand the science. And I then spent 5 years exploring the science. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a pub quiz, so I hope people will just respond quickly in the Q&A here. So just don't intellectualize too much about this, but just give me the first answer that comes to your head. Number one, is fasting healthy or unhealthy? Excellent. There's a pretty good consensus for it being healthy. Okay. Is longevity mainly genetic or mainly lifestyle? Okay, so generally about a 50-50 on that one. Okay, which matters more, diet or exercise? So I think the consensus is probably on balance diet. Next question, are men genetically designed to lead shorter lives than women? We know that they do, but is it genetic predisposition? Just give you a couple of moments to catch up. Okay, does fat make you fat? Yes or no? Okay, and there seems to be consensus around no's. What is it that makes us fat? Is it just a combination of eating too much and moving too little? Is that the paradigm that you would go with, or would you address another paradigm? Okay. How much sleep should we get? And then finally, are all calories equal? Okay. So while you're just pondering, I'm not going to necessarily answer all these questions, but I'm trying to make you think and make it a bit more interactive. Now, when I give talks, particularly to health professionals, I always start with a health warning because cognitive dissonance may ensue. We can see here a slide that shows the correlation between per capita cheese consumption and the number of people who died becoming tangled in their bed sheets. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. As you can see, it's a beautiful correlation, but I don't think many of us would believe that one was the cause of the other. And so much of what I was taught, and so much of we've all been taught around food, diet, exercise, is based on really poor correlational studies, not least by Ansel Keys, which has led to a really poor science and a lot of failed beliefs. Now, probably like you, I was born into a milieu of increasing chronic disease, dementia, cancer, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, etc., etc. And I never really questioned the history of it. I just know that it's got ever worse. And probably like you, I had pretty much no training in nutrition or exercise or sleep. And my expertise, if you like, is to treat symptoms with drugs. That's what we're all trained to do. Obviously, pharmacists don't have the diagnostic skills of our medical colleagues, but that's the point, essentially. We spend most of our lives waiting for symptoms of disease to arise, and then we suppress the symptoms with drugs. And my frustration is we're not even really curing. We're suppressing symptoms. If you stop the medication, all the problems come back. And that's what led me on to this journey. Now, we know that our beloved leader has had a recent conversion on the road to Damascus as a result of his brush with COVID. I think he was 17 stone, seriously obese. And he seems to think that, and I'm a huge fan of spitting image, so I just couldn't resist the image here. Boris seems to think you can outrun or outcycle a bad diet, and both Asim and I disagree with it. And this is Boris's obesity strategy. I'm not going to talk about it in too great detail, but you can see, you know, there's some good stuff in here, right? So I would certainly give this one, the idea of banning buy one get one free, and vegetables at the checkouts and the watershed things. So I would give that certainly 1.5 cheers. And, you know, the idea of NHS weight management services and more prevention going on is all a good thing, I would say. How has fatness and obesity changed over time? Well, you can see the growth here in the number of morbidly obese and overweight people in the last great period. And it's interesting, there's all been this stuff recently around the period of the First World War. What's interesting is no one was fat. You look at those old movies, they're all slim. What I didn't know until very recently was almost all these diseases, these chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases that basically soaks up 80% of healthcare, are all brand new diseases. If you go back 120 years, essentially there was no diabetes, no cancer, no cardiovascular disease, no type 2 diabetes. And most of us have been taught, yeah, that's because people died age 35. And that was wrong too. So there was a huge number of deaths in childbirth and in early years. But if you lived to the age of 20, 100 years ago, your life expectancy wasn't that different to someone aged 20 today. The difference is that the percentage of people with all these non-communicable diseases and autoimmune diseases, these are basically man-made invented diseases that didn't exist 100, 120 years ago. And of course, the obesity pandemic follows suit. We're not quite the fattest nation on earth. As you can see, our American colleagues as ever are ahead of us, but we're not in a great place and we're getting worse on a daily basis. On the other hand, we've had the the obesity strategy. And on the other hand, we've had Rishi Sunak's Eat Out to Health Pals. And this is the CTM for one of my staff. Now, she's a young, slim, 18-year-old. And as you can see, she went out, which if you look at the left-hand side of the page, you can see she's got very good glycemic control, but you can see what a McDonald's and chips and a Coke did to her. This is a young, slim, fit, 20-year-old taken well into the diabetic range while she's eating out to help out. And I think we need to make some significant decisions about what eating out to help out does. It's certainly not eating out to help out the NHS. And here's the other problem with the NHS. On the one hand, they say they want us to lose weight. On the other hand, almost all the interventions are either abstraction of food with these ridiculous shakes laced with seed oils, which I'll come on to, or high carb, and all based on calories in, calories out, and not sustainable. And as Asim, I'm sure, will say, our mantra is to eat eat real food. Now, I've illustrated two 82-year-olds here. The lady on the left is quite a famous American grandma, 82 years old, didn't start getting fit until into her 60s. And you can see how fit and active she looks, and a mirror of health. And if 82 looks like that, then bring it on. But what most of us dread is the inevitable descent into dementia and ending up dribbling into our soup. the guy on the right, but I guarantee you he's still taking his statins. Now, the science appears to show that maximum life expectancy for a human being could be around 120 years, although that's being challenged now, and that's a debate for another day. The point I've illustrated here is that this individual's vitality is pretty much unchanged. They've lived to 120 and died in their sleep. Now, I'm 60, and most 60-year-old guys have developed their first long-term condition. And we are extending lifespan, but we're sure as hell not extending health span. So we're leading, in fact, even those gains in longevity are being reversed now. So we're now, despite the 140 billion pounds we're spending on the NHS, people are living shorter and less healthy lives, and that just doesn't make sense. Which brings me to the blue zones. Now, these are 5 very disparate areas of the world where when men and women lead lives of equal length. They live in huge numbers over the age of 100, and all the standard non-communicable autoimmune diseases that we talk about are hardly seen. And my first thought, well, they've just got lucky genes, but they can't have, because there's no common gene pool. And interestingly, there is one blue zone in Loma Linda, California, and they're Seventh-day Adventists, which tells you something about their lifestyle. But the point is they're multicultural. There is no common gene pool. So if there is no common gene pool, it clearly has to be a lifestyle related scenario. Now, again, I'm not going to go, I'm rattling through stuff, and I haven't got time to go through the detailed science today. This is very much an overview, but if anyone wants to come back to me with detailed questions, delighted to do that. So what is it that confers this healthy longevity? The first has got to do with movement, natural movement. Now, if you think about, from a genetic point of view, we human beings are, what, 1 million, 2 million years old. If you think about the kind of movement a hunter-gatherer would have made, they'd be moving steadily to gather. And then every so often they'd run like hell, either to kill something or avoid being killed, which is why high intensity exercise is so much more valuable than low level cardio. Now, I don't suppose any of us would like to be wandering up the high street anytime soon in our loincloths with our spear. So what's the modern day equivalent? Well, if you think about the movement of a waitress or maybe a postman, then every so often the 200-meter hurdles. So natural movement. The next is having purpose, or as the Japanese call it, ikigai. And we all know people who've had successful professional careers. They retire, and at point of retirement is when you have your maximum social capital. And interestingly, the year that you retire is the second most dangerous year of your life, the first being the year you're born. So having a purpose to continue, and it's interesting, in these blue zones, there is no such thing as retirement, really. It's a bit of a Western construct. So people carry on and they downscale as they get older, but they pretty much continue. They live in hierarchical societies, they live in extended families, and the old people's social capital grows as they age. And the grandparents and great-grandparents have a huge role in bringing up the children and grandchildren. So having a purpose and being revered. The next is the ability to downshift. They've shown, for example, that dog owners on average live 3 years longer. Why is that? Well, number one, you have to walk the bloody thing. But number two, they are incredibly good stress busters. The next is around diet. So it's what they eat, when they eat, and how they eat. Now, they eat organically because they have no choice. They eat seasonally because they have no choice, and they eat mindfully. And as a result, they tend to take in fewer calories, but much higher quantities of micronutrients. So I'm neither pro-vegan nor pro-vegetarian. I've got plenty of clients who are both, but it's always more difficult to make them healthy. But what I am pro is a lot of plants in the diet, because they're high in micronutrients and low in calories. Nothing wrong with a glass of red wine, particularly wines that are high in polyphenols to feed your microbiome, and resveratrol, the antioxidant. So I recommend a glass or two, that's a glass or two, not a bottle or two, of Malbec to my clients. And then a sense of belonging and a sense of putting your loved ones first and being in the right tribe. So if you look like Boris, you'll probably have a foreshortened life. And if you look like Matt Hancock, who's leaner and fitter and healthier, all this, what does it add up to? Well, it adds up to 12 additional healthy years of life. To me, that's a fantastic return on a bit of an investment. If we go back, as I've said, to 100 plus years ago, before the health systems were really introduced, overwhelmingly people were dying of infection. Now, I know we're all obsessed with COVID, but even at its outside, how many people has COVID killed? 50,000? And if you were to, watch the pages of the media, you might get the impression that if there was no COVID, no one would be dying. In a normal year in this country, 620,000 people die. And they mainly die, as we know, are based on our daily experience of these non-communicable chronic diseases. And we kind of shrug our shoulders and say there's nothing we can do. But when we see a small increase in deaths due to infection, and actually the death rate isn't that much higher than a normal year with a bad flu, we lock down the entire economy and ignore the rest. And I think that's a disgrace. So simultaneously with this huge growth in non-communicable disease, we've also seen a huge growth in autoimmune diseases. And again, it's a new dynamic and the things track together. So pick your autoimmune disease of choice: hypothyroid disease, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, MS, etc., etc. Again, it's a new dynamic. Which brings me on to my friends, the microbiome. Now, in our small intestine, we've got 2 to 3 kilograms of bugs, fungi, eukaryotes, bacteria, viruses. We human beings have 22,000 genes, which might sound pretty impressive. But if I told you that we've got fewer genes than an earthworm or a fruit bat, would that surprise you? In fact, we don't have that many more genes than a banana, believe it or not. So how come we're such a successful species? And the answer is that we've been able to harness the genetic material, the microbiome of the community, the microbiota of bugs that live in darkness in our guts. And I think there's 100 trillion bugs in our guts, there's still 3 kilograms. And the genetic material of the microbiome outweighs the human genetic material by about 100 to 1. So even at our best, we're only 1% human. And if you want to learn more about this, I particularly recommend following anything by Tim Spector, Professor Tim Spector. These bugs, they help us with our immunity, they help manufacture our vitamins, and of course they have a pretty active metabolism, so they burn a lot of the energy that we consume. And it's well known that in America they use antibiotics as growth accelerators to fatten animals. Well, by the same token, if you give human beings lots of antibiotics, they get fat, they get inflamed, and there's also quite a big role with mental health as well. So simultaneously with this great rises we've seen in non-communicable and autoimmune disease, we've also seen a big rise in autism. And what they've shown is that autistic kids have a characteristic dysbiosis, a derangement of the gut bacteria. And autistic kids tend to be very faddy about their diet. And they've also been able to show, both with human models and with mouse models, that if you can improve the quality of the diet in autistic people, you can reduce their autistic symptoms and improve their mood. And I always think about the ecosystem in the gut like a tropical rainforest, and it should look like the area on the right, on the left rather, and we all end up with a microbiome looking like the one on the right. And if you follow the hunter-gatherer tribes, they have about 2,000 different bugs in their gut. The average Western has got 1,500. And again, if you're interested in this book, that in this subject area, I can recommend a book called The Missing Microbes, which goes into it. So what is the cause of this deforestation? And in short order, the first starting point is childbirth. And we know that when a woman is pregnant, her microbiome reverts to a much more childlike state. And the reason for that is that when the baby is born exiting the birth canal, it picks up the maternal microbiome. Obviously, if the baby's not born, is born via cesarean, that doesn't happen. The next has got to do with breastfeeding. And it turns out the breast milk, far from being sterile, has got 200 bacteria in it. And of course, a breastfed baby gets the benefit not only of the milk, bacteria in the milk, but the bacteria on the breast and the nipple. Now, if a baby's neither born naturally nor breastfed, that's kind of 2 horses down. And the latest studies, I think if you remember back to my scale of obesity, I think the Mexicans are the fattest nation, the second fattest nation on earth. And it's a social norm in Mexico for women not to want to give birth naturally, you know, the old too posh to push. And they've been able to show great correlations between high levels of elective cesarean and high levels of obesity, type 2 diabetes, non-communicable disease, autoimmune diseases. And the latest study in Mexico is when the baby is born, they get a maternal tampon and they wipe the eyes, ears, nose and mouth of the baby to reseed the maternal microbiome, and that appears to work. Fascinating. The next is the repeated use of antibiotics. Now, when I was at university, we knew that we got the wrong bug. You know, we all knew about E. coli getting into the wrong place, and we'd hit it as hard as we could with a broader spectrum antibiotic. Of course, no one does that anymore, but we still, I think, heavily over-reliant on antibiotics. And of course, the last is the Western diet, or what we call the standard American diet, or SAD. And you can leave this food out, you know, in the open forever, and it will never go off because it's, you know, nothing can go on it. It's got no real micronutrient content at all. So that combination is absolute devastation for the microbiome. Now, I know that it's, leaky gut is kind of frowned upon by the medical orthodoxy, but bear with me, it's a thing. So 85% of our immunity is in our gut. And if we've got nice, healthy lining of the gut, with tight junctions between cells, and everything looks good, we've got 2 benefits. A is the ability to absorb micronutrients, and B, to reject the bacteria and toxins that we ingest. Now, we kind of imagine food that we've eaten as inside us, but I always think about it like this. It's kind of in a hollow drain pipe, in one end and out the other. And it's the integrity of the gut lining that determines our ability, A, to absorb micronutrients, and B, to reject the bad stuff. And if you start to get a breakdown of the cement between the cells, or indeed breakdown of the cells themselves, then you get 2 sets of problems resulting. One is malabsorption and nutrient deficiency. The other one is autoimmune processes and inflammation, which obviously isn't good. And of course, the blood-brain barrier being what it is, that also goes to the brain, and you can now start to see that there's a model here. And if I said to you, you know, when people are depressed, we give them serotonin reuptake inhibitors to increase their serotonin levels, make them happier. What I think a lot of people don't know is 95% of our serotonin isn't in the brain, it's in the gut, and it's manufactured by the bugs. So you can see that if you kill those bugs off, and those bugs, remember, are responsible for maintaining the integrity of the gut lining, not only will you be not great in terms of malabsorption, nutrient deficiency, you can see how it could affect mood as well. So that's kind of the first half of my story, really. And again, I apologize for the speed that I'm going through this, but time is short. The next part of my story has really got to do with energy balance and insulin. Now, as in general practice, we can measure HbA1c, but we can't measure insulin. And I think that's a tragic mistake, because if you have a diet high in sugar, carbs and processed food, you're continually spiking your blood glucose, and the response is an insulin spike. And the very tight control, glycemic control, leads to an insulin spike, which drives the insulin drives that excess sugar into the liver, where it's first processed to glycogen, which is your short-term store, which will run the body systems for about 24 hours, and then to fat. But also, there's another side to this story outside the endocrine control, which is the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And if you're stressed and short of sleep, then the sympathetic nervous system, the flight or fight response, is dominant and makes you a lot hungrier. And I know myself, if I've had a couple of poor nights sleep, I'm far hungrier and I pick up all the wrong things. So this balance between endocrine and sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system is really important in terms of energy energy balance, because when we take energy in, we can do two things with it essentially: burn it or store it. And if your insulin is high, then you're permanently in energy storage mode, which comes back to what I was talking about at the start, the fat kid. The hungrier I got, the fatter I got, and the fatter I got, the hungrier I got. It doesn't make sense, does it? You can be 6, 7, 8 stone overweight and permanently hungry. And that's because all your energy is locked away by your insulin. So back at some basic science, we have two forms of energy storage, and I liken it a bit to a hybrid car. And if you've got a Toyota Prius, you know, your battery will get you the first 20 miles and then the engine kicks in seamlessly. If we're continually filling our, if we're continually spiking our blood glucose, then we'll be continually spiking our insulin. And as I said, you will first, whatever doesn't get burnt gets stored, initially in the liver and in the muscle as glycogen, and then latterly in the adipose tissue. And the problem is that for most of us, we're permanently raising our sugar and we're permanently in sugar burning mode, and we never get to actually use the adipose tissue. And so we're not fat adapted, we're not metabolically flexible. And many of us will be eating pretty much from dawn till dusk. We never have any gaps between food because we're eating and snacking and snacking and eating. If you follow David Unwin, he talks about some of his heart sink patients, and that before he could see that particular patient, he'd have to eat 3 biscuits. You know, you can see what happened next. So part of my process within ProLongevity is to get people fat adapted, then their insulin comes down, with it a whole host of other things come down, but they relearn the ability to burn fat. And I gave a talk recently about all of this, and one of the guys was a marathon runner, and he said, well, of course, I have to take these sugar drinks halfway through, otherwise I run out of energy. And I said, well, put it like this. Your glycogen stores will cover about 2,000 calories. So when you get to about 20K, you run out of energy and you take a load of sugar on board. I said, but just imagine you were fat adapted. How many calories do you think your marathon running burns? And he said, yeah, 3,500, 4,000 calories. I said, exactly. So if you ran the whole thing fasted and fat adapted, you wouldn't take any sugar on board. You'd be burning fat all the way through. And at the end of your marathon, you'd be exactly 1 pound lighter. And he just looks at me and he had to go away and think about it. So what actually happens? And I always think about diabetes as a 25 to 30 year journey. We're continually spiking our sugar, we're continually spiking our insulin, we're then hyperinsulinemic. And that hyperinsulinemia drives lots of issues, which I'll come on to. We're filling our glycogen stores and our fat stores. And at some point, we get to the point where we're having, however high our insulin levels are, they can't quite control our blood glucose. And I kind of think about it like this. If you imagine the insulin as a dam and you think of the glucose as a lake, we get to the point of pre-diabetes, and that's maybe 15 years of abusing our bodies, and the sugar starts to trickle across the top of the dam. And ultimately your dam collapses and you're type 2 diabetic. And you probably know that back in the days before we had these more sophisticated tests, the way that they were able to tell diabetes, they would taste the urine, it would taste sweet. What's actually gone on in the background? Well, when I was trained, I was told that we burn the islets of Langerhans burn out and we can't produce sufficient, the beta cells burn out and we can't produce sufficient insulin. Turns out that's not the case. What actually seems to happen is that as the fat that we're producing builds up and we can no longer store it appropriately, and it builds up in the liver, causing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and in the pancreas, some of the beta cells de-differentiate and become alpha cells. Now just think about it like this. Whatever insulin does, glucagon does the reverse. And normally there's a natural balance between the two to give you the appropriate glycemic control. All of a sudden, if you've got less insulin and more glucagon, that flips, and that's what flips you into type 2 diabetes. As I was saying, hyperinsulinemia, we don't measure insulin in general practice. I'm absolutely crusading that GPs should be able to order the HOMA IR test. So when we're looking at someone's excellent HbA1c, but we've got no idea, is their insulin up here or down there? So we really don't know whether they've got metabolic syndrome. That's such a crucial test. Unfortunately, for me to get that for my patients, I have to order it privately. Hyperinsulinemia drives all these diseases: the heart disease, the lipid disease, the hypertension, the dementia, and of course polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's kind of buy one get seven free, but not in a good way. So I'm pretty much passionate about this whole subject of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. What are the consequences of insulin resistance? Well, I've just listed a few of them here, but it's interesting how when I start with my clients, like I always say to them, you know, your weight is the thing that worries you, but it's not the thing that worries me most. It's your insulin levels driving all these diseases. And what's astonishing is as their weight comes down, their blood pressure comes down very quickly, and I'm rapidly able to, with the GP's agreement, withdraw them from their antihypertensives, their HbA1c improves, their sleep improves, their mood improves, and all these things improve. Now, I guess we all know that the simple sugars are a bad thing and cause a big sugar spike. And so most of us, particularly my health professional clients, have been taught instead to have complex carbs, you know, your porridge for breakfast or your brown bread. But if you look at the area under the curve here, there ain't much difference. And I think we've all forgotten the fundamental science, which is your high complex carbs or starches are simply glucose molecules stuck together with an oxygen. Of course, when you metabolize them, they become glucose. And I've illustrated here, sorry, I'll come to this. One thing I don't want to do is demonize an entire food group. So there are, you know, first of all, we demonize the proteins, then we demonize the carbs, then we demonize the fats. We've got nowhere left really to go. I don't demonize any food group. What I do demonize is high sugar, highly processed foods and seed oils. So what my point here is that not all carbs are bad, only the highly processed ones. And you may have seen these fantastic infographics produced by GP David Unwin. And here's a typical breakfast. I don't know, 30 grams of cornflakes is equivalent to nearly 9 spoonfuls of sugar. But here's the rub, 30 grams of cornflakes is pretty much a thimbleful. No one has 30 grams. Most people have 60 or even 90 grams of cornflakes. That presumes, and that's 30 spoonfuls of sugar for breakfast. And that presumes you don't put sugar on your cornflakes, which is exactly what I used to do, and wash it down with some orange juice, which is exactly what I used to do. Then we have a sandwich lunch with some whole grain barley bread, another 5, 10 or 15 spoonfuls. I hope someone's keeping count. I think so far we're up to about 35 spoonfuls of sugar at lunchtime. And then we'll have a salad in the evening with some boiled potatoes, another 10 or 20 spoonfuls of sugar, not forgetting the raisins we put on our luxury muesli. Of course, it's not all bad news. You know, if you happen to like cabbage, but just look at, another one I always pick is bananas. Small, but so many of my clients, they like to jog, they like to exercise, and they'll have a banana or two before they go, not realizing that a so-called healthy large banana, 10 or 12 spoonfuls of sugar. But it's not all bad news. So I'll come on to the alternatives. And of course, I don't know about you, but I love an Indian takeaway in the evening with some basmati rice. And you can see that essentially we're having sugar for breakfast, lunch, dinner, tea, snacks. And of course, look at eggs. And we've all been frightened off eggs, haven't we, by this whole cholesterol rubbish. Eggs are a perfectly balanced nutritional food, full of healthy protein and fat and devoid of carbs. As it happens, I've never been hungry for breakfast, but if I do have a breakfast, it's almost invariably eggs, and that will keep me full right to the end of the day. Now, living for many years as I did in St Albans, which is the campaign for real ale, I do like a pint of real ale. But how many people realise that 2 or 3 pints of real ale, you're looking at 20 or 30 spoonfuls of sugar? If you're careful and forensic, actually, you can, I mean, I do like a lager. I haven't given it up. I have a real ale as a treat once or twice or 3 times a year, but not in large quantities. If you're careful about the booze that you select, you can find some pretty low carb lagers, and they're really nice. On the left hand side, at the bottom, a large glass of sweet wine has got 10 times more sugar in it than a small glass of red. But the other point about the red wine, as I said earlier on, is the micronutrient content. So a lot of my clients are quite happy to say, okay, I'll swap the real ale for the lager, I'll swap the sweet wine for the red wine, and I'll still enjoy my life, I'll still be having foods that I enjoy, but I'm eating much more healthily. Now, let's come on to a bit of CGM and an illustration. So here's someone with type 2 diabetes, and they've taken the usual porridge for breakfast, taken them well into the diabetic zone. Next day, they've had an omelette and almost no change to their glycemic index. If you think about it from a nutritional point of view, clearly the micronutrient content of the porridge is very little, whereas the micronutrient content of the omelette is much higher. So in nutritional terms, much healthier, but also that will likely sustain you all day. How many of us start our day with a so-called healthy porridge, and 2 hours later we're starving because we've had a sugar spike followed by an insulin spike followed by a hypo, and I see it all the time. So I've talked so far about fattening carbohydrates, raising your insulin, making you obese. But actually that isn't where the real problem lies. The real problem lies in whether you get the fatty liver and the insulin resistance. What is really crucial to understand is, just like all calories are not the same, all sugars are not the same, and fructose sounds innocent, doesn't it? Fruit sugar. Now, every single cell in the body can metabolize glucose, but only the liver can metabolize fructose. In other words, fructose is do not collect 200 pounds, go straight to fatty liver disease. And you will get far worse results with a high fructose diet than a high glucose diet, which is why I'm having a huge Twitter war with Innocent Smoothies, who are now owned by Coke. It's, yeah, they haven't added anything, it's what they've taken away. They've taken away the insoluble fiber and they've concentrated the fruit sugar. And it's just exactly the same process as how, remember 50 years ago, smoke the brand your doctor smokes, right? And this was widely advertised in the medical press. I want to talk now just very briefly about seed oils, because again, so many of my health professional clients have come to believe that these heart healthy seed oils are a good thing. I can tell you they're not. They're produced very cheaply in industrial processes in a factory that looks very much like a petroleum processing plant. And yet it's just the same way. Just as cigarettes used to be, you know, smoke the brand your doctor smokes, and I've seen adverts for sugary drinks, for innocent style smoothies in GP Pulse magazine, you know, take this to your doctor. And we've all been conned by the processed food industry. And we've all been frightened off of the eggs. And if we go back to the basic science, right, the original Ansel Keys studies that everyone likes to talk about, very few people know that originally Ansel Keys studied 20-something countries. And what he carefully did was he drew the line looking at the relationship between deaths and percentage of fat from the diet. And there's a lovely correlation on the left. What he didn't tell anyone was that actually if you graph all the countries, you can see that there's no correlation between the amount of fat in the diet and per capita and deaths per 100,000. And actually, if you analyze it very carefully, the reverse is true. The more saturated fat in the diet, the lower the amounts of heart disease. And I've just seen a client this week whose cholesterol had been high, but whose HDL was fantastic and whose trigs were low. She went to see her GP and said, and he said, oh, your cholesterol's too high, you've got to change your diet. Cut out the fat, cut out the meat, eat more carbs. And within 3 months, she'd done exactly what she was told to do. And now she's got lower cholesterol, so the GP's happy. What the GP hasn't looked at is the relationship between her HDL and trigs, which has reversed itself completely and is now unhealthy. So a perfectly healthy person gone to their GP, who's worried about one single parameter, cholesterol, given a really bad dietary advice and made her less healthy. If you actually look at studies of traditional populations who have a lot of saturated fat in their diet, like the Maasai and the Inuit, they are both slim and healthy.
Graham, I'm just giving you a 1 minute warning.
Yep. So I'm going to skip through some slides, but I think this one's important. The human beings don't know what to eat, but the ants do. I talked about the way that margarines are manufactured in highly processed plants, and it comes as a result. You've got very fundamentally unstable oils that oxidize, destroy your lipids, and that's the cause of much of the cardiovascular disease. And all of it driven by the vested interest of the food industry. These 10 companies own all these brands, and guess where their profit comes? I can tell you it's not from broccoli. These are the good fats, the traditional fats, all based on the smoke point. This is the Eat Well guide that we spent all these years educating people with, written for Public Health England by guess who, the food industry. And I completely moved away from the Eat Well guide to much more of a modified Mediterranean diet. And if you look at the people who write the Eat Well guide, they're all conflicted, but no one knows. Okay, I will skip a couple of slides. This is just an illustration. I'm nearly at the last slide. This is a young lady with polycystic ovarian syndrome. She was about 20 odd kilos overweight, tending towards pre-diabetes. And I see this a lot with young overweight people who have high carby diet, isolated systolic hypertension. And we got her completely well controlled. Her weight came down, her waist came down, her blood pressure came down, everything was good. One evening, she had this big sugar spike, went up to 11.3 at 8:30 at night. And I thought I sent her a WhatsApp, what do you have for your evening meal? I thought it was a pizza. Turned out to be one piece of pineapple on the family barbecue. So coming to the end now, sleep is really important. Exercise we've talked about. Vitamin D is a discussion for another day, and basically a modified Mediterranean diet. And what I do with my own service is we provide continual blood glucose monitoring. The CGM, I think, is a game changer in pre-diabetes and diabetes, as well as, of course, in type 1. We take account of all the lifestyle factors. We take the typical biometric data that the GPs would typically order the bloods anyway, the LFTs, lipid profile, HbA1c, and we see these huge improvements, not just the biometric improvements, but improvements in sleep and mood. And I'll probably stop with this slide. This is a GP colleague of mine who had enjoyed 35 years of deteriorating health, and we put him on the program. He was hypertensive, he had a CPAP, he was snoring so badly his wife refused to sleep with him, and everything improved within 2-3 months, and his wife said to me, "Thank you so much for giving me my husband back." And I think we've forgotten this, but this is so important. Our food should be our medicine, and our medicine should be our food. So I will stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Graham. And I'm very sorry for pushing you through the last bit, because it was absolutely fascinating. And we have had a few questions that have come in, and one of them actually, I wonder if you might go back to the slide, because they were Zema Frisbee wanted a bit more information about what oils we should actually be recommending to patients in order to avoid seed oils.
Sure. I won't page back and forward to the slides. What I'll do, I'll make a note. I'll send you a couple of the slides, Camilla, that covers that. So the point is this: 2 million years of evolution. What did we eat? Right? We ate animal fat and we ate dairy fat. And these factory fats made in industrial processing plants, first of all, they're devoid of the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Secondly, they're inherently chemically unstable. So these polyunsaturated bonds are subject to oxidation. Now you've got oxidized fat. It leaves the factory oxidized, then it sits on the supermarket shelf, becomes more oxidized, then it sits in your cupboard, and as you empty your bottle, becomes more and more oxidized. And these are toxins. So the oxidized fats actually build up in your adipose tissue. So unlike a sugar spike, where if you have something sugary 2 hours later, it's gone, it's much closer to smoking. So it's not one cigarette that kills you, it's the cumulative effect of smoking regularly over many years. And these toxins actually build up in your adipose tissue, they poison your mitochondria, so they damage the sort of battery of the cell, and they also damage your lipids. So your lipid transport functions become deranged. Nothing to do with cholesterol and everything to do with oxidized damaged lipoproteins. And it's all got to do with the fact that they're fundamentally chemically unstable and become oxidized, and it's the oxidation that does the damage. If anyone wants more detail on that, if you join my Facebook group, Wellness with Prolonged Longevity, I did do a sort of 40-minute talk on it, so it's all there. But I'll send you some information, Camilla.
Fantastic. So am I right in thinking anything non-processed, so butter, lard, olive oil, coconut oil, all of these substitutes we should be advising and avoiding polyunsaturated and marg and oils?
100%. So I did warn you that there'd be some cognitive dissonance at some stage.
Thank you. So I think as sort of GPs, we've got a limited amount of time. Julia Hempenstall said it's an absolutely fascinating talk. Can she push you for the top 3 bits of advice that you can give the overweight, type 2 diabetic, metabolic syndrome patients with little time or money, but wanting to try and do something to lose weight in an already busy consultation when you've dealt with?
Sure. No, I completely get that. As I say, my partner's a GP. I've done lots of work. I understand your world rather well. What some GPs manage to do is they get at least some 15-minute appointments. And I think if you can engineer some 15-minute appointments for those particular clients, that's a good thing. Number one, have a look at the Public Health Collaboration website. Both Asim and I are passionate supporters of the Public Health Collaboration. On that website, there's a talk by Jo McCormack, who's a GP herself, and she actually practices a 10-minute consultation, live, semi-live with the patient, and goes through a lifestyle type of a thing. So there's a tremendous amount of free resources on the Public Health Collaboration website, both in terms of training for GPs specifically, but also in terms of resources that you can print out and hand to patients. And there's a ton of, all the videos from the conferences are there. So that's a great resource. Another great resource I point people towards is dietdoctor.com. Another great resource is the work that David Einenwin has done with the Royal College of GPs. So there's lots of education there. And in terms of top tips, focus on sleep, avoid ultra-processed food. So this is the one I've nicked from Asim, which is turn over the pack, ignore the front of the pack, look at the back of the pack, and if it's got more than 5 ingredients, some of which you've never heard of, put it back on the shelf. So this comes back to eating real food. Essentially, if you eat real food, but you need to understand what that means, you won't be hungry, you won't be fat, and weight just comes down naturally. And of course, if people can use CGM, it's an absolute game changer. My service, unfortunately, currently is a private service, but we're trying to build up sufficient information for it ultimately to be an NHS commissioned service.
And I think people aren't familiar with CGM. I think by CGM, what you mean is
continual blood glucose monitor. So you'll be familiar with the Libre Freestyle device, which you're starting to see for your type 1 diabetics. And I get quite a few type 1s referred to me by GPs as well. I can normally A, massively improve their HbA1c, and B, I can often halve their insulin usage, which of course is a huge saving on your drugs bill. So yeah, engage with the Libre device. It is a fascinating device, and there's 2 or 3 other new ones coming on stream as well.
Thank you. Because I think sort of as general practitioners, obviously it is a good idea to delve deeper and to sort of look at these other talks. We're obviously limited with time, and we want to sort of have easy nuggets that we can give patients, and it's not always easy. It is a very complex thing. So sort of telling them about avoiding ultra processed food, looking at the back of the packet, sort of going back to basics, eating the fruit and veg and cooking the basics is a good idea. I mean, people are questioning, you know, what would you recommend as a sample breakfast, lunch and dinner? I think it's very difficult, but I don't know if you have got a recommendation.
Yeah, no, I absolutely can. The first thing is, a lot of my clients and myself are not hungry for breakfast. So I'm very keen on time restricted feeding, so eating within an eating window. Number one, if you're not hungry for breakfast, ignore breakfast, just don't eat breakfast. The only reason we've all been taught to the belief that breakfast is the most important meal of the day is everything to do with Kellogg's share price and nothing to do with health. If you are going to have something that's with breakfast, what I would say, if you've got time for a traditional cooked breakfast, that's great. So you want, you know, bacon, eggs, tomato, sausage, cooked, of course, in animal fat or butter, not in ultra-processed foods. Eggs are a really good thing for breakfast. And I usually find if you eat like that, you're not hungry at lunchtime. You naturally tend to skip and just have an evening meal. Avoid cereals in most cases, because most cereals are ultra-processed. So anything that's got Nestle or Heinz or Kellogg's on it is automatically a no-no. What I would typically have for lunch is a salad and some lean protein and something broadly similar in the evening. The other thing is we've all, of course, been frightened off red meat, complete rubbish. I'm now, having spent years avoiding red meat because it's going to give me cancer, I now eat it pretty regularly. So just eat the traditional foods that we'd have eaten. Think what your grandparents and your great-grandparents ate and eat more or less the same. Go back to basics.
Thank you. And I think you talked about fat adapted. I wondered if you wanted to expand on fat adapted, what that means, because there's a lot in the, there's recently been the marathon that has been done, or the 5-day marathon that have been done with 0 calories in fat adapted.
So we've kind of all, I mean, I spent, as I said, I was hungry and fat and hungry. And it's because I lost the ability to burn my fat, right? What is the fat there for? Why do we get to store fat? Think about the bears that hibernate over the winter, right? During the summer, they eat a lot of fruits, they become hyperinsulinemic and insulin resistant, put on weight, it's a natural adaptation. And during the winter, when they hibernate, they lose it. Human beings are much the same. So we're designed to store the fat in the periods of plenty and burn the fat in the periods of famine. The trouble is that famine never comes. So I get people, so my basic process goes like this. I remove the ultra processed foods. I reduce the carb content. I'm not anti-carb. I'm certainly not anti the more healthy carbs. Then I get people to eat regular meals. So instead of eating, eat, snack, eat, snack, eat, snack, I get them to stop the snacking and coalesce the meals into 3 proper periods of eating and then stop. Then I say, I then try and condense it. So you've got a 12-hour eating window. So there's 12 hours between the last thing they ate last night and the first thing they eat in the morning, right? Now, once they've lost the carby, ultra-processed food diet, they're not hungry all the time. They find that relatively easy. And then the process from there on can be to skip more meals. So we go into a sort of 16-8 eating window, and then we build up to 24-hour fasts. And actually, again, it's not a subject I've got time for today, but there are significant other benefits of 3- and 5-day fasts around autophagy and apoptosis, which is a whole other area of science. But that's the general drift of it.
Thank you. And Charlotte Day has mentioned that she has done the IF and ketogenic switch program to get fat adapted, lost 3 stone 10 since July.
Fantastic, brilliant, well done.
Assures us it can be done if researched well.
Yeah.
So can you talk about Saxenda for severe obesity as a kickstart in severe obesity?
Well, what does it do? Tell me what it does.
I'm not the expert, so
yeah.
It is to do with the leptin.
Yeah, right. So what essentially, if you think about all the newer type 2 drugs and the liraglutides, etc., what are we doing? We're either peeing out the excess sugar, and my argument is that's fine. Why put the excess sugar in the first place? Mm-hmm. Or we're trying to countermand the diet by fiddling with the different hormones that modulate hunger and satiety. Okay. And if you look at the results with Saxenda, they're pretty unimpressive, actually, right? Yes, you may lose a bit of weight and things might improve a bit, but it's a very expensive way of doing what you can do. So for me, I've thought about offering that as a service to my clients, which I could do as a private service. it kind of defeats the whole point, which is I can achieve such better results by eating real food that it's just another form of a cop-out, right? Why is it in the NHS that we want to abstract everything to, you know, like with the diet shakes, right? We get food and we turn it into a medication, and then we lace it with seed oil and we call that healthy. And to me, the Saxenda kind of agenda is very much along the same way. I mean, yes, I agree it has a marginal benefit, but it's very expensive for the NHS. And you can achieve exactly the same results, in fact, far better results, just by a healthy diet. But of course, we're not educated in that, so we just don't know.
Fantastic. I mean, I think it does.
I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. It comes down to sort of treating the cause rather than medicating the result, which is what this is all about.
Yeah.
So that there are lots of other questions that open up a massive can of worms, so I'm not going to go into it. I think we've come to the end. People have commented, amazing presentations. Will the slide be available at the end? And absolutely yes. There's a question about cholesterol, but as you will definitely agree, that's a whole subject in itself. So I just think, you know, I wanted to sort of thank you for such a thought-provoking and sort of great overview. Clearly, sort of obesity is on the rise, and despite the government advising move more, eat less, it's not being addressed. Clearly, we're eating too much sugar, seed oil, processed foods, and those are the things we need to sort of advise our patients to be aware of and decrease. And often there's a lot of hidden carbohydrates in seemingly healthy foods, which, like the insulin.
Don't even get me started on the vegan movement.
And as you've demonstrated, insulin is the master hormone, and once we understand that and address it, as you said, you know, all the treatments in the NHS, if you've got diabetes, you've got too much insulin, and all the treatments are aimed at increasing the body's insulin. So actually we need to get back to basics, address the core causes.
Yeah, I mean, most of the drugs are insulinomimetics, and it's a bit like treating an alcoholic with alcohol, isn't it? I mean, you'd never do that.
They would be delighted, I'm sure. So, you know, I really think we need to question the Eat Well guide. It's outdated, clearly. We need to be talking to our patients about sort of low carb substitutes and challenging the amount of carbs they're eating and getting a greater understanding. Do we really need breakfast? You know, are we continually putting carbohydrates in the system and never being able to access that fat metabolism? So I think it's got lots of food for thought, lots of interesting things for us to challenge our patients about. And it was a fantastic, comprehensive and great overview of a very thought-provoking subject. So thank you, Graham.
No, absolute pleasure. As I say, apologies that I went through so quickly. I really should have, you know, to do it properly, you need a day. But anyway, what I was going to say is if you collect all the questions in the chat and anything else, put it into text and just email me the lot. What I'll do is I'll pick out the key themes and I'll try and give you some answers on that. So that's number one. Number two, if my email address hasn't been shared, please do share the email address. And I'm happy to have talk individually to people. We offer, if anyone wants it, a 15-20 minute consultation without any charge or without any obligation. And also just to flag up our community called Wellness with Prolongevity, which is a Facebook group. We've actually got quite a few health professionals on the group as well as patients, and that's a great place to interact and chat.
Fantastic. And if you compile a list of links, we can put them in under your slide so that people can link onto that. Because
we'll do.
the slides will sit on the LMC education site for people to look back on. So thank you, Graham. That was fabulous.